It doesn't matter if there's an issue with the pattern, one's own human error, or you're simply not feeling the project anymore, but I believe that if you are not completely happy with a project, especially after putting it away and coming back to give it another chance, you should frog it. It is not worth the disappointment and heavy sigh that you do every time you see it or try to work on it. So I want to talk about 3 projects of my own that will be getting frogged and why. Tea number 1 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. The first project I want to talk about is Tea number 1 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. When choosing this project, I wanted a simple, loose layering piece that could be worn by itself in the house or in summer if needed. When I started this, my initial intention was to make it for myself, but I changed my mind and decided to dedicate it to my partner instead. I started the shoulder pieces using a very old half-used skein of Drops Lima, so the shoulder sections are slightly different color than the rest of the garment, but that's okay because it works out to be symmetrical and intentional. I bought the rest of the yarn for this garment with the full intention of completing it, but alas. Here are some of the issues that I ran into in no particular order of severity. The first issue was that my gauge was way too large. I don't know how or why, but my gauge became horribly off during this project. I am aware that gauge changes over time and can very well change within a project, but I had done a gauge swatch and knit the project within a fairly close time frame. The gauge of the pattern is 24 stitches by 32 rows within 10 by 10 centimeters. My gauge measured at an average of 20 stitches by 28 rows per 10 centimeters. It's as if the fabric decided it didn't want to be the gauge it used to be anymore. Regardless of why or how the gauge is the way it is now, it is too large and that is not desired. The second issue was that I got incredibly tired of knitting plain stockinette very quickly. Knitting flat was definitely slightly more engaging, but with the sheer amount of stitches I was having to knit every round, I was just annoyed. Most definitely because of the gauge issue, it was made worse. And the last issue is that it was way too big. Even though I was making this for my partner now, it was 2 me's wide and the neckline was very large and droopy. He tried it on and didn't mind the fit even though it was oversized on him too. I considered altering the pattern to make the sleeves longer and turn it into a sweater, but I was already annoyed at how bothersome it was to knit, and I wasn't fond of where the process was bringing me either. It was not intended to be an oversized sweater, it was also not intended to be with such loose gauge, and neither with such an overly large neckline. I was recommended to try to at least knit and finish the neckline to see how it sits after that and make my decision then, but truly just looking at the project made me disheartened. So I hid it, and it has been hibernating in my drawer for some time as I tried to decide whether to frog it or not. I have made the decision to frog it and turn it into something else, and hopefully something either me or my partner will be able to wear comfortably. Because this is a really lovely color, I'd love to use it in a garment, and I think it's better to frog it than to have it be an ever-present bother. The second project I want to talk about is The Twigs by Junko Okamoto. This sweater was my very first introduction to color work, and I can very much tell. I was consistent in my methods, but I was confused about color dominance because the research I had done gave conflicting information. Eventually, I found a series of videos by Roxanne Richardson where she went into yarn dominance, the difference between parallel and rotating floats, different methods of trapping floats, as well as why you should go up a needle size in your project during the colorwork sections. Despite all of the other research I had done, I think her method of explanation and organizing all the information the way she did helped me understand a lot better. I think also because now, months or maybe even over a year since I've seen those videos, I have done color work applying those techniques and methods. I used to have overly loose color work in all of my projects and ended up constantly frogging them because everyone would reiterate over and over that you need to make sure you had loose floats and make sure that there's no puckering in your work when you knit it. In turn, That made me overcompensate and ended up having long, loose floats and large gaps in my work. I personally knit inside out, and I found out later that that is a method that people use to make their floats looser. My tension was also already fine before, but since I was worried and wanted to do things right and apply those tips and tricks I was hearing about, my work suffered as a result, and that was also true with the twigs. I had some sections that have puckering and some that are looser, because I realized I wasn't stretching my floats enough, even though I truly did not need to. Nowadays when I knit socks, I don't change needle size at all for colorwork. I've only successfully knit 2 colorwork socks now since I have solidified my technique a bit more, and for me that's the way to go. I stick to 2.5mm throughout the entire project, and that leaves me with a neat colorwork section that indeed does not stretch out or get gappy once I put the sock on my foot. I want to frog this twigs so that I can apply all that I've learned to get more quality color work, and also because I feel like I will have a bit more tenacity when it comes to such a large scale project like this now. The final project that I want to talk about is the Step by Step sweater by Florence Miller. This raglan sweater was my very first knitting project. I wanted a sweater, so I started knitting a sweater. Honestly, this project is likely the one with the least faults on this list. Its problems stem from fit, and that's truly it. It is just way too small for me. To put it into perspective, the smallest size of the pattern gives a 90cm finished bust circumference, and I have a 75cm bust, and this probably has at most 5 or 7 centimeters of positive ease. It was hugging me and just not the fit that I was going for. I had been aiming more so for a loose, relaxed fit like this example in the pattern, but that is not at all what I got. It really is a shame because it would have been so nice to have a sweater that I would actually wear, despite it being my first sweater and that there were errors in it. I was and still am an ambitious knitter, but I did my research in order to ensure that I would come out with a finished product that actually had some use. But alas. I'm not even sure if I did a gauge swatch for this because I cannot find one, but I would be surprised if not. Regardless, it is too small and I plan to frog it completely. And speaking of frogging the step-by-step sweater, I started doing so already. I took some of the yarn from the sleeve and started freehanding a circular yoke sweater with trees because I love trees. I of course took no instruction nor research because I was bored and just went straight into it. Once again, there are colorwork tension issues, sizing issues, no gauge swatch, and an overall lack of planning that made this sweater end up in the graveyard. So it's getting frogged. Again. Hopefully I can wind up the yarn and plan something simple yet easy that I will actually finish and will actually fit me. I really want to be more organized with my projects, and clearly these suffered partly from my lack of planning and making sure that things were going well before I got as far as I did. These projects may be getting frogged, but I learned a lot while doing them and it allowed me to become a better knitter. I have experience in making these exact mistakes now and know how I want to correct them and prevent them in the future. Even if I was disappointed in the lack of a finished object, I can always do the same project again if I truly wanted to. I hope that the yarn can get a new life in a most enjoyable project with a finished object to match.